and welcome to this special edition of the Real Deal Plus, coming to you from the Al Arabiya English studios. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Now, football holds unparalleled global power as the world's most popular and commercially valuable sport. Or more than just a game, many would argue that football functions as a global language with international reach and significance that are hard to match. Well, the beautiful game has had an important part to play in Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and beyond the year 2030, because the Kingdom will, of course, host the World Cup in 2034. Well, let's find out more now. We can speak to Dr. Kristian Coates Ulrichsen, who is the author of a new book entitled Kingdom of Football, Saudi Arabia and the Remaking of World Soccer. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Kristian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, let's start by making a point, really, which is that Saudi Arabia isn't new to football, is it? The Kingdom has got a rich football heritage. Some clubs are reaching centenary milestones, aren't they?
Yes, some of the earliest clubs, especially Al Ittihad in Jeddah, will be celebrating its centenary in a couple of years. And some of the other clubs in the Eastern Province in the 20s, 30s and 40s. So there's been a football ecosystem for decades. There's been a football league since the 1970s. Rivellino, the captain of Brazil, joined Al Hilal in 1978, made a splash comparable to when Ronaldo joined Al Nassr in 2023. And of course, Saudi Arabia will all remember the USA 94 World Cup 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago now, when the Saudis beat Belgium with that incredible goal from Saeed El Owaidan and got to the second round. And the Saudis have also reached 5 successive Asian Cup finals, winning 3 of them in the 80s and 90s. So there's a long history that we don't maybe see in other Gulf states that we have seen in Saudi in their engagement with football.
Absolutely, Kristian. You make that point, don't you, that Saudi Arabia has indeed played in some World Cups. Now, I want to ask you, how do you see football helping to deliver some of the goals of Vision 2030?
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways in which they can contribute. One is, of course, having major events in Saudi Arabia. There's the AFC Asian Champions League every year now in Saudi, the final 8, quarterfinal, semi-final and final, the Asian Cup in 2027, obviously the World Cup in 2034. So these will bring huge numbers of visitors to the Kingdom to try to strengthen the tourist and sport sectors, which are key areas of the Vision 2030. I think we have to also look at the sports policy in collaboration with tourism, using sport to generate awareness that something's changing in Saudi Arabia, that the Saudi Arabia people thought they knew 20 years ago is no longer the Saudi Arabia we see today, that many more people have probably heard of Vision 2030 as a result of football and investments in golf and boxing and other sports than would have been the case had there not been such investment, and really creating a sense of excitement, creating a sense of buzz that Saudi Arabia is the place to be. And of course, when you have stars like Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi posting on social media to their 500 million followers about the times they're having in Saudi Arabia, that gives you a kind of an unparalleled global reach. So I think it all helps to generate awareness that things are changing and that creating a buzz that will be necessary if the giga projects are to come to fruition and to be populated by residents, by visitors, to meet all the ambitious targets that Saudis have set for tourist numbers and obviously foreign direct investment as well.
Absolutely. So football is going to boost visitor numbers to the Kingdom and also boost Saudi Arabia's soft power. What about hosting the World Cup in 2034? What message does that send out about the Kingdom and its global standing?
Well, I think it sends out a very clear message that Saudi Arabia is able and willing to be the first single country host of a 48-team World Cup. We'll have 3 hosts next year in US, Canada and Mexico, and then 6 hosts in 2030. It, I think, cements the notion that the Gulf in general is the new epicenter of sport, especially in the Asian Confederation, where we've had now 4 out of 5 Asian Cups taking place in the Gulf. Obviously, we had the World Cup in Qatar in 2022, so a second World Cup in 12 years. And I think the lesson from 2022 was that the Saudi performance, especially the win over Argentina, the absolute scenes of wild celebration that followed it, showed that Saudi Arabia has a depth to its football passion that many people outside Saudi Arabia maybe weren't aware of. And so hosting it in 2034, I think, would be a way to showcase the depth of interest and feeling across the kingdom in football more generally.
Now, there's quite a bit of excitement, isn't there, as there always is, about the infrastructure for the World Cup in Saudi Arabia. What sort of flavour does the excitement give us about the sorts of stadiums we might be seeing for this World Cup? I mean, there's this idea of a stadium in the sky. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think building new stadiums is more of it's a better way to use, obviously, finite resources, the allocation of resources, than, say, some of the more ambitious projects, such as the Line, which were always more about appealing to an international investor class. Whereas building stadiums will be much more focused on domestic Saudi interests, on domestic Saudi participation. I mean, I have no doubt that the stadiums that are built will be as daring architecturally as some of the ones in Qatar were in 2022. And I think it obviously will be an infrastructure that will be there for the future. It won't just be a one-off. We obviously have some of the stadiums being built for 2027 for the Asian Cup, and these will remain infrastructural projects that will continue into the 2040s probably. So they're looking, I think, much further ahead in 2030 and creating that infrastructure that will last for decades.
Now, can you put a figure on, or even give us a sort of a guesstimate on the sort of value that football adds to the Saudi economy?
Well, I think that's maybe difficult to pin down specifically, but I mean, football and sport in general is probably undervalued. It's a huge untapped market, and there is obviously a massive interest in Saudi Arabia for the sport to grow. We've obviously seen already Al Hilal, Al Nasser, the big four teams that the PIF has invested into, getting sold out crowds, 40 to 50,000. Once the supporting infrastructure is there, I have no doubt that it's at least in the billions of dollars that the Saudi sports economy can begin to generate. And I think this indicates also that Vision 2030 is able to evolve, because when the vision was launched in 2016, there wasn't that much emphasis on sport. But we now see a much greater focus on sport and tourism and entertainment, of course, as well. And it shows how the vision is able to adapt to changing circumstances and new opportunities as they arise. And I think also the 2034 for the World Cup, it obviously takes the pressure off 2030 as the kind of delivery date for all the projects, in the sense that it gives an extra 4 years of construction of major projects that will allow existing projects to open in sequence, maybe an initial phased opening in 2030 and then scaling up to full capacity by 2034. So it takes some of the pressure off 2030 as the delivery date for some of the projects, just because 2030 is now only 4 years away. It seems a long time away in 2016, but it's coming up quick.
Absolutely. Now, 70% of the population of Saudi Arabia is under the age of 30. So we're talking here about a young population, by the looks of things, a very connected population. How do you see football fitting into that and also shaping national Saudi identity?
Well, I think it gives Saudi youth something to look at, to feel proud of. Certainly another way of connecting with the vision, with the progress made on securing the World Cup, on transforming the big Saudi teams and potentially other Saudi teams as well. It's another point of connectivity. And I think also internationally, it indicates that Saudi youth are just as fun-loving, as football-obsessed as young people all over the world. And I would argue that the win over Argentina in the World Cup in Qatar did more for Saudi soft power than anything the government could have said or done, because it was spontaneous, it was bottom-up, it was just scenes of pure joy. And so the image it sent of Saudis being just as obsessed as people all over the world, I think, was very powerful.
Now, do you think that football is shifting global perceptions about Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I think it is. And I think it's also been striking how, so far at least, there hasn't been as strong a backlash to Saudi Arabia hosting the World Cup as there was, for example, in and after 2010, when Qatar won the rights for 2022. I think that's partly because Qatar was the first. Obviously, the first is always the most sort of consequential in some ways. But I think what was striking in 2023, when the Saudis became the preferred bidder for the World Cup, was there was a sense almost of not resignation, but inevitability about it. That something just even 5 years before, the idea of Saudi hosting a World Cup would have been almost unthinkable. And by 2023, 24, it became inevitable. So I think it already has begun to shift external perceptions about Saudi Arabia. And I suspect that the next 10 years will continue to do so and to sort of normalize Saudi Arabia and to maybe do away with some of the outdated stereotypes and perceptions that people may still have had going back to the 1990s or post 9/11.
Sure. Well, let's go back now to football itself, the game, because in your book you talk about the post-Ronaldo era in Saudi Arabia. And I wonder why you mentioned that. What's the point you're trying to make there?
Yes, well, in the book, I look at other examples to develop and grow football leagues. And the one I looked at with interest was the North American Soccer League in the 1970s in the US. And they never really replaced Pele. And they had the most famous footballer in the world joining the New York Cosmos, just as Ronaldo joined Al Nassr. And they really struggled to replace Pele. They bought Franz Beckenbauer, Johan Cruyff, George Best, genuine legends of the game, Johan Cruyff as well. But there wasn't the same level of kind of awareness at that time among the American public. Now, obviously, with the Saudi case, there's much greater awareness of key individuals. So I don't think it's as much of an issue when Ronaldo leaves, but just because Ronaldo was the first superstar to go, and in some way he actually opened the door for so many others to follow, I think it will be a case of trying to fill his boots with some other huge names when, of course, he will retire because he's already, I think, 40, almost 41 years old. So I think finding a way to keep him involved, either as an ambassador or in some other capacity, will probably offset any shift away from his playing career.
Cristiano Ronaldo is definitely a hard act to follow. I mean, who do you think might follow in his footsteps in this post-Ronaldo era? What sort of signings might we see?
Well, I think some of the signings for 2023 are up for renewal in 2026. So if some of the younger players extend, that will be beneficial from the Saudi side. I think there's obviously been an extensive speculation for years about Mo Salah, and I mean, that would make sense from a sort of Muslim point of view as the sort of great superstar of the Islamic world. So to have Mo Salah eventually join a Saudi club when he leaves Liverpool, I think that would maybe be something that Saudis would put a lot of effort into. Obviously, Lionel Messi just extended for another couple of years in the US, so he won't be finishing his career in Saudi, as was the subject of speculation in 2023 before he joined Inter Miami. So I think Mo Salah would be the one they would try and get to end his career in Saudi.
Yeah, you say end his career, but do you think we might also see some players going to Saudi Arabia in the prime of their careers?
Yes, we've already started to see some of that in 2023. And I think also the performance of many of the players based in Saudi Arabia at the European Championships in 2024. There were several Spanish players, for example, who were key performers for the Spanish national team where they won the tournament. So I think it indicated that going to Saudi Arabia wasn't a career-killing move, even for players at the prime of their career. And I think that was maybe a strong sense of reassurance for other players who might be tempted to follow, that you're not condemning yourself to sort of marginalization if you're going to play in Saudi for a couple of years.
Okay, let's talk a bit about homegrown talent. What needs to be done to ensure there are more homegrown players? I mean, do they need, for example, more academies over there in Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I think this is where the Saudi experiment is more of a struggle, in the sense that the authorities have continually increased the number of foreign players who can play on each team, and that has actually squeezed the opportunities for young Saudi talent. And we see that feeding into national team performances. The Saudis struggled to qualify for the World Cup. They eventually made it, but it was a bit of a struggle. I think Roberto Mancini, when he was the coach last year, actually referred to some of the problems of only having a small group to pick from who are actually starting. So I think investment in the broader ecosystem of training facilities, of the sort of deepening out the club infrastructure will eventually help, and academies and so on and so forth. Because if you only have a league of foreign superstars, that is going to affect the domestic game, and they will need to figure out how to have a balance between the foreign stars and the local Saudi talent, of whom there are very many.
Now, a little bit earlier on in the conversation, you were drawing parallels between the Saudi Pro League and America's MLS. And it made me think about Japan's J League, for example, as another parallel that perhaps could be drawn here. Any lessons, do you think, that perhaps Saudi Arabia can learn from other countries' football league experiences?
Yes, I mean, I also actually do look at the J League in the book, and also the Chinese Super League too. And I mean, the Chinese Super League in the mid-2010s was grabbing international attention for the same reasons as the Saudi one, with massive transfer fees bringing key players to China. I think with the J League, the lesson that the Saudis can take is that initially bringing foreign imports was a risk. And once I think they recalibrated to try to make the teams in Japan more local, more organic, that actually gave it a durability that perhaps wasn't there in the 1990s when they were bringing initially aging foreign stars like the Saudi Pro League has started to do in 2023. The teams have to be organic. They have to be much more long-term in their thinking. And that actually has led to a significant increase in Japanese national team performances and in the performance of Japanese clubs in the Champions League in Asia. I think that's a lesson for the Saudis. Think long-term and don't just move beyond the kind of importation of aging foreign stars, because that will only take you so far.
Now, you alluded to this a little earlier on, and we're not just talking about football here as being an important business. There are lots of other sports tournaments as well in Saudi Arabia. There's boxing, there's golf, plenty of high-profile events that come to Saudi Arabia. But do you think, though, of all of them, it's fair to say that football is the most valuable?
I think that's fair, yes. I think football has a global appeal, mass appeal. It's obviously got a much greater reach than many of the other sports. There are different reasons, I think, for engaging with different sports. Golf in the US with Live Golf reaches a very different type of constituency, for example, than many football investments would. So I don't think they're doing a one-size-fits-all strategy. But yes, football has a global appeal and reach that I think other sports simply don't have.
So do you think, therefore, that's why Saudi Arabia has decided to invest perhaps more in football than in some of the other sports?
Yes, I think so. And I think there's obviously just opportunities opening up in terms of especially hosting of big events where, for reasons of cost or for the difficulty of aligning local stakeholders, both for the World Cup and for the Summer and Winter Olympics, there are many fewer countries now who are willing to take on a hosting of this magnitude. And so that's why we've seen over the past decade, especially, so many more events taking place in what you would consider the global south or the non-Western world. And I think this has opened up opportunities for countries like Saudi Arabia to really engage in a much greater way. And of course, we see the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Gianni Infantino at FIFA really deepening too. So I think stamping Saudi Arabia as the epicenter, the center of gravity for football going forward is probably a very strategic and clever move.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you very much indeed. I want to thank you, Kristian Coates Ulrichsen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. And I think there's a lot going on. There's clearly going to be huge interest in how Saudi Arabia performs at the World Cup in 2026. And so we'll have to sort of watch this space and see what happens next.
OK, exciting times indeed. Well, thank you for watching this special episode of The Real Deal Plus with me, Tom Burgess-Watson. See you again here soon on Al Arabiya English.